Trustee Gallup-Moore is not yet here, but trustee Everett is. And so let's start if we can. Does anyone know if there are any public comments?
Nothing here.
Nothing, I've got nothing, Brian, you've got no indication. Okay,
I have not.
all right, so we could go to the tentative budget.
Great. Okay, so we will have a presentation on Thursday for the board meeting. We don't have one.
The
We just
PowerPoint thing.
PowerPoint, yeah.
Okay.
So, if it's okay, I'll just walk through, and Rudy, are you there? See your name up there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, so I'm gonna sort of go through your introductory document here. If please feel free to interrupt and fill in where I miss it, if you would. And if you have any graphical or tables or anything like that, numerical tables that would help, please don't hesitate to show those as well. So,
Okay.
And
So-
can we ask questions as we go?
Yes,
along
yes,
so we
please,
don't
yes,
have to
yes.
slip.
Right.
Yeah.
and so this is a tentative budget that's based upon both the governor's January budget and the May revise. And it has some interesting and important aspects to it. Real simply is it provides the governor's budget provides quite a bit of new funding as it relates to coal. But it also funds a portion of that with money we already have. And so we, in the current year, 22-23, we received money for deferred maintenance and for what they call a COVID recovery block grant. And they have indicated that they may reappropriate that money, which is interesting, since we've already had it for a year. But they may use part of that money to fund our sort of student-centered funding formula next year, which I'm gonna give you a raise and you're gonna fund part of it with your savings, right? That part.
Really?
Yeah. And so
Yeah, it's
we have,
significant.
we have set aside 53% of the money we received for both of those items. We were spending them this year, scheduled maintenance and the COVID block grant. And we have taken 53% of what we received last year. So I think it's around $4 million of the COVID grant and about $5 million of the scheduled maintenance. And we have set that aside, and we called it a reappropriation in the budget. Where we went ahead and started with that.
That's fine. I just had a little incident, so I had to go take care of it.
So that's all I have.
Oh, right.
Thank you. Good. Are we done? This will be the first meeting we've ever had.
So anyway, I was just saying some of the things about that are interesting. So there we are.
Yes. Went to 211. Don't know why.
So I was actually just getting started, saying we're talking about the budget document. And it is a tentative budget.
Mhm.
And I've always thought that the tentative budget could be changed, when the legislature actually enacts their budget. But I believe that this year we have a potential for more significant change than normal. I may be wrong, but I think we will. The Legislative Analyst's Office has indicated that the May revise is optimistic. And that there is a larger structural deficit than they recognize. So we'll see where it goes. But we're taking the information that we have today, running with it, and we're putting it in the budget, thinking that if we have to make change, we'll do that as soon as, it could be just a couple of weeks. But we'll know. So hopefully.
Could I interject something?
Yes.
So I attended the
the Government Affairs California College League
Yes.
webinar. And yes, they also said the same thing about that there's going to be some adjustments, but they were reassuring us that the governor is really adamant about not changing the amount of funding for schools and impacting the COLA for schools. So they were reassuring us of that. Unfortunately, money's going to come from other areas. So,
Right.
But Brian was just explaining before you got here that part of that COLA is basically being funded by money they gave us last year that they're gonna take back and reappropriate.
So they're calling it reappropriation, which is a little misuse of the word. So they gave us money in the current year, 22-23, for COVID relief block grant and for schedule maintenance. And on a one-time basis, they're saying we may need to use that to fund part of our increase that they're handing out in COLA. We'll see. So we have sort of set that money aside in our fund balance, thinking that we'll see where, and it's not in the unrestricted general fund. The schedule maintenance is out in Fund 43, and the COVID relief block grant is in Fund 12, the restricted general. So anyway, I'll jump into the document. The first page is sort of the preamble, the values and all that, and you go over to the revenue, and we have FTS assumptions, and there's a lot going on here, but if I can boil it down to just a couple things, is that, remember, we're getting paid for around 2,000? No,
Yeah.
2,000 more FTS than we're generating. Right, so they're paying us for 12,000 something FTS, and we're generating 10,000 something in FTS. So they're still paying us quite a bit, and that continues in this coming year. And so we have some small increases in enrollment, but we're really still being held harmless. We're not up to where they're funding, so the growth is not at the kind of impact that you would want to see. But if I can go down there, the changes that they're proposing are related to the additional funding that we're going to get, mostly caused by the COLA. So if I go all the way down to item 15 on
Can
the
I
page, yes, please, can ask any questions.
Can I ask first, the FTS assumptions about the increase of 1%? It's really hard to guess these things, I recognize, but I did note that currently we are percent-wise down about 18% in units on the enrollment reports.
wait, do we have that information available to look at?
Actually, not here right now, but Vice President Mia Gomez did a comparison to the previous two, because we had two summer sessions. So
Mhm.
they put the.
No, I was looking at fall.
Yeah, I'm talking summer school right now.
Right.
So for summer school, we're up 3%.
Okay.
So, yeah,
That's good.
so that's a nice trend. So fall's still too hard to project.
Okay.
But you may be right. We may be down. We're trying to project, and it's a new day,
I,
Right.
yeah,
trying to figure out what enrollment's going to be.
We
okay.
don't know.
There's a lot of pressures too. I mean, you've read that our, the population of sort of our traditional students is not, it's not getting larger, it's getting smaller.
Right.
So we have a lot to do to turn this around. But that's sort of our task, if you will, is to figure that out. And we have, through the funding mechanisms, we have a little bit of time to do that. That has to be a goal, is to grow our enrollment back to what it was, what we were being paid for. Otherwise, we're going to come down, it's gradual. It's not a cliff, it's a gradual, but it's a very steep slope.
I think a part of it too is that we have, it's not just the regional, but it's nationwide trends we're dealing with in addition to statewide, concerns. And then I saw where UC Santa Barbara is is really making a push for transfers, and so they're going after some of the same students that we would have, in the past. So, I mean, I think there's a lot that's going on, but I think we do have the capacity and the ability to kind of improve our numbers. And I think we got a team in place that can really start to make that happen. So I'm feeling less anxious about that part right now. Because I think summer is a really good indicator about what we may likely be seeing in the fall, just, as someone who's been in education for a while, but we'll see. But I don't feel as anxious as I was earlier.
Thank you. If there is a sort of an immediate risk for us, in my opinion, enrollment wise, it's the 10,000 threshold. That loses us a couple of $1 million really quick.
That's true.
And so that's, to me, we have to maintain our enrollment above that.
Yeah.
We just-
Agreed.
So anyway, so you can see number 15, like there's a lot of puts and takes above it, but the bottom line is we're growing in an unrestricted general fund by 8.9 million. And that's item 15 of page 3 there. So that's the number I want to sort of, so we got,
Are you referring to the 7.6 million statement?
No, number 15.
item 15
I'm on number 15.
Well,
on page
Oh,
3.
you're on page 3.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay,
I'm
wrong
talking about
15.
Yeah.
I was on page 5.
Yeah, there you go. You're way ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm always behind. So for state revenues, we're looking at an increase from the state based mostly on our COLA, which is a great thing. They have some one-time things. Some of those aren't happening, but you can see number 4, deferred maintenance and instructional equipment. They have not received any additional funding for the state for next year.
Now, where are you?
Number 4 under state
on state
revenue,
one
one
time.
time.
Oh, okay. Well, wait a minute. I'm still back. in the-
Page
Okay, go ahead. Do you have
31.
some other questions about?
Yeah.
that? Yes. go ahead.
It's really more of a comment about how it's described
Which
because,
page, March, are you?
well, page 1 through all the ones before.
One where we are right now.
I can't really hear you, Marsh. Can you speak just a little bit so I can hear what you're
Sure.
saying?
The numbers before, like 5, 4, 5, all the way to 15. If you look at,
On revenues ongoing.
I'm on there.
if you look at expenditure number 5, which is on page 4, it
Okay.
says short-term employees, staff, student budget assumptions will decrease in fiscal year 23-24 parens 1.67 million compared to 22-23 adjusted budget 1.72 million. Okay, I think that formulation gives me both numbers, so I know what's going on. But when I read the ones that are earlier, like supplemental allocation factors, 1 million total allocation for 23-24. I don't know.
What page are you on now?
She's on 2.
That's on page 2,
Which number?
5.
Okay.
I don't know in each of these instances what
Okay.
the underlying number is, in
Okay.
other words. So, where were we last year? And now we're increasing. So I don't have a sense of the importance of the change somehow. And if I try to go back and find it by looking at the previous year's budget, it pretty much says the same thing. We're increasing it so much, but I never get the underlying number. So what I'm arguing for is a formulation of how we describe this that consistently says, basically, last year we spent this much, it'll increase this much to this number.
I understand.
You see what I mean? And that, to me, I can
There's,
tell what the pieces mean.
okay. Very good, understand. So
Mhm.
in the students centered funding formula, we have this amount they're gonna fund. Now, things may increase below that, property tax could go up, but our total funding doesn't go up because property tax goes up, we just get less because
Right.
they're gonna hold us to the same number. So that's why I added number 15, because I wanted to say, the effect of all of that is our revenues are going up 8.9. Now, we can go back and tell you exactly what's causing that, and we can add those points. I don't know that we'll have it done by Thursday,
Right.
but I
might,
can
yeah.
have that.
No, I just
Yeah.
knew kind of ultimately,
One of the other
You see
things
what I mean?
too is that
you're looking puzzled.
No,
This-
I'm thinking, sorry.
historically, this
Mhm.
document has related the adopted budget to the next adopted budget.
Mhm.
Well, some parts of the adopted budget were a little sort of optimistic
Right.
last year,
Yeah,
Saw that.
before, right?
So that.
And so we may have adjusted the budget, like for international students or something. They adopted a budget that was very aggressive. And you've seen this
Mhm.
whole year, we've gotten less. And so the
Mhm.
adjusted budget is. So anyway, I understand what you're saying is to try to say, what is it exactly from adopted budget to tentative budget?
Mhm.
A lot of that might have happened in this year. You know, the reduction, and from the actuals this year, we may be up.
Right,
So if you go from adopted budget to tentative, it may show us going down. But from the actuals this year to next year's budget, it may show it going up.
well, I could be persuaded that the comparison point is your projected actual, now that we have a pretty
there you go.
solid number
Projected actuals to tentative budget.
to tentative
That's
budget.
how we can go through these and say what that is.
Right, I mean, I can see both of them having an advantage,
Got it.
because we wouldn't see, for example, that we overestimated on the international students, but.
Mhm.
I can also see kind of a more realism to the projected actual.
Got it, we'll do that. I like that, because that shows from this year to what we expect next year.
Yeah, I mean, you guys think,
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. I mean, I understand the clarity, the need for clarity with some actual numbers
Yeah.
that we can refer to.
I mean, I
That's fine.
felt that you provided that when on the last column, it says actual budget, right? And so you can take that and compare that to what was the proposed budget. And because I felt like that information was kind of already given, right?
well, not for the categories of the assumptions.
Yeah, not in
You
this.
won't see the FTS numbers in that budget.
Right, because we're
For the
assuming
SIFs.
that enrollment may go up, right? So we can't say if it's gonna definitely go up. We're assuming, you're talking about the FTEs that we are assuming may increase by 1%. Is that what you're
Well,
talking
the
about?
numbers in the unrestricted general fund budget
Mhm.
reflect these assumptions.
Okay,
However, you don't see a line item that says credit FTES so many dollars, non-credit FTES so many dollars in that formulation of that budget.
you want to
So
see the
this is
actual
where you
dollars.
see those more individual numbers.
Okay.
And one of them I was curious about in 14, which is on page 3.
Uh-huh.
It's got the in total revenue from the SIF is projected to increase by 7.1 million compared to the adopted budget for 22-23.
Mhm.
And so what she's saying, she'd like to see what that FY 22,
Yeah,
23
right.
was.
Right,
So that
it's-
we know what that 71 million is comparing to.
Right, and you
Okay.
could say, is it 10% up? Is it 2% up? What is it? Anyway.
Okay.
But I'm also curious because what I see in 5 and 6 was an increase of 2 million and 0.6 million, which doesn't get me to 7.1 million.
No, it doesn't.
So other than
Pieces
SIF,
of it, right.
whereas when we say the total revenue from SIF is 7.1, where's that coming from? In addition?
COLA.
COLA.
Okay,
That's the COLA calculation, because what happens is, no, I'm sorry, that's why I was thinking about what you were saying. Is the COLA is added to the different rates. So like when we're looking at the rates for the SCIF, and let's just talk about AB 540 students, okay? So in 1920, we had 495 and the rate was 948. So that is a difference, right? So then when you look at the following year, okay.
What
which
page
is
are we?
2020, I'm not on any page.
Okay.
I'm actually reading you the actual reports.
Got it.
So the actual report would show that we had 421 AB 540 students and the rate was 996. So what happened from one year to the next was COLA got applied to that rate. So they go through and we get COLA and they go through every one of the rates in the student center funding formula and they apply the COLA. And that's why there's a fallacy when we think that only FTS matters, because of some of that money is sitting in those
Right.
categories.
Which
So-
which is why I'm curious about what kind of an increase we are having in those supplemental allocation beyond basic FTES numbers. And you've raised a question in my mind. So page 2, 5B, AB 540 students budgeted 0.3 million. Is that with COLA or without COLA?
So the way I'm reading, the way you guys wrote it is that we're not including an increase, but the actual rate will increase for next year. So our rate this current year that we're working with is $996 for each factor, like Pell Grant or Promise Grant, or AB 540 is $996. That is the rate. So for next year, it's going to get times by 8.22, which is the COLA, which will give us a new factor. So regardless of whether we have more students or not, you will have an increase unless you drop students.
Right. Or the nature of the students changes.
Yeah, or that shifts around. So it shifts inside. So I'll complicate it just one step more. Like if you go from 1920 rates to 2021 rates, we lost $1 million in the supplemental. So it went down $1 million because we lost students in those categories.
Right.
So that's how delicate this gift is. So, and that's just 3 of like, probably 27 or 30 different factors.
We could create a table here, rather than have this narrative, we can create a table and say, here's projected actuals, adopted budget, projected actuals, tentative budget. You know, change from one year to the next in every
No, that would be-
category.
That would be great. But I'm also, what I'm interested in is what you're talking about, which is, are we expecting to increase the number, for example, of AB 540 students? And that's why it's going up. Or is it simply application of COLA and we will have as equal numbers or fewer students? Because having the students that bring us this money is important.
Right, so we'll take a different approach. We sort of built off of what had been done in the
Right,
past.
right.
So we can take a
Yeah.
completely different approach and have it be a table. We can either describe it here, or we can provide a table for an appendix, however you like it. But we can get down into
Right.
the, however you'd like it. It's short, budget, so we'll do it however we like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it more difficult. I'm just trying to get at
No,
the
I
transparency and understanding, are we losing certain students that we really would like to have because
Okay.
we're rewarded for that,
We can do that. We'll do that.
not to mention that we want to.
Yeah, I think I.
Right, so we'll take 2 approaches. One, we'll create a table so that it's very obvious
Mhm.
from the past to the future. And we can also just tell you how we got to the increases that we're showing.
Okay.
Okay, let's see.
Where were you on? You were on deferred maintenance.
I was
Page 3.
just kind of walking through the state revenue ongoing and the one time. And the one time we were at item 4, where I say the reappropriation, if you will, for maintenance and I don't mention it here, but the COVID block grant, $4 million there. Local revenue, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, number 1 of local revenue say is projected to remain the same. But if we're projecting a 1% increase, wouldn't that go up
Sorry.
in FTES?
Oh, local revenue?
Yeah, local revenue number 1.
Local revenue enrollment fees revenue is projected to remain the same compared to projected MTS. Sure what that, I'm not sure what that.
What number you on? Local revenue number one, we had projected an increase of 1% on credit. And I just thought that would make your enrollment fee more or less percent on too.
No, remember where enrollment is, we're being paid for 2,000 more than we, if we generate
True.
1% more, our revenue is unchanged.
Okay, got it.
We need to grow a lot to
Yeah,
be impacted.
Right, because we got a grace period or
Yes,
grace figure.
and it's gonna go down, and so we need to grow because it's
Right.
gonna, if we grow every year, it'll go down less in the end.
okay, got it.
And so the number 2 and number 3 at the top of page 4 are important. Although international tuition rate increased by 11%, and you may remember that we had a long discussion, it's 10 point something, but it was in total. Revenue from international students are projected to increase by only 5%. And that's compared to the adopted budget. The adopted budget last year was very aggressive. And some people may say it's aggressive next year too, because we are counting on it to go up.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So how real is the assumption that, because I know that currently our international rate, I think is a little bit more than 50% than what we normally have prior to COVID. Don't we have something, we have more
No.
international students
We had more international students before COVID.
before COVID, right?
Right now, it's about half of that.
Right, it's about half of that. And so, and when you provided the assumptions, the 5-year assumptions, and a lot of that is based on if we continue to get our international students to kind of go back to those numbers. How real is that assumption? Because a large component of our budget is paying for salaries. So is there a strategic plan to get our international students back up to where we used to be? Or, I mean, is there something that tells us that we will continue to go back up to prior numbers?
We have not made the strategic enrollment management plan to move us to the prior numbers, because I think there was a point where the college was at 1,500.
Okay,
And then it dropped to 12, which seemed a little more realistic. We were trying to set a number somewhere around 1,000.
Okay.
Gradual,
right.
not because we recognize that we don't want to take it above that might be just too much. We
Okay.
need to be thoughtful about it. So the strategic enrollment management plan thinks about international students at a certain slow growth rate.
Uh-huh.
Brian cut back the percentages significantly on all of the growth. And then same goes with dual enrollment. We're anticipating, that's where our growth will probably happen in most areas.
Okay,
And then some growth with out of state and in-state students out of district, but those are all very slow growing targets. Because we want to grow back in a way, and we don't want to grow back, because we're never going to go back to 18,000 FTEs.
Okay.
It's not even a reasonable number for a district this size. And I think that's something people have got to get in their head. 18,000 FTS was way too much for a college that has a service area of 225,000 people.
Yeah.
It's just way too much. I was in a service area of 500,000 people, and we were at 15,000 FTS. And that was about our right size. So when you think about the service area and what you have, we have to really be thoughtful about that. So I think running somewhere around 11 to 12,000 FTS overall is probably a fair thing for Santa Barbara. So that's what we're trying to kind of get at.
Yeah,
And I was wondering, is a part of that also the fact that we have to be mindful that the community is always watching us because of the concern about, and particularly if we're going out for a bond, pushing for students that aren't in district, and they get really, really concerned. But I think another key factor we have is that now that we're emerging out of COVID, all of those international restrictions are gonna be lifted so that it won't be so difficult for international students to apply. So we'll have to be careful monitoring our enrollments of them, so that we don't get to that place where we have more than we should for our ability to kind of right size where we need to be for international, for out of district, and for out of state. So I think that's probably, something that's gonna have to factor in our enrollment, strategic enrollment plans too.
Yeah, and there's a nuance in that too, Trustee Everett, that's really interesting is that the way the restrictions are, some of the restrictions and barriers are going away. And now international students have to take most of their classes in person. If they're an international student, they can no longer take them online. So that puts the onus on us that we have to have more face-to-face to be able to have international students. So that's going to be one of the challenges we're dealing with right now. Because if they have to be able to get a full schedule face-to-face, because I think they can only take one class online, I think starting this fall.
And
So
that's the chancellor's office?
No, that's the,
Federal.
that's
Federal.
visa, federal,
Got
and
it.
they're
Got it.
student visas.
Got it.
So there's the requirements, because COVID, they allowed them to be online.
Right.
And so that's one of the things the role is really trying to teach us that we have to survive without them. So we won't, I don't think we'll experience an overabundance
Okay.
for a while.
Thanks
Just,
for that. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
lots of nuances going
Okay.
on.
Well, part of our expenditure increases are increased in sort of the recruitment, because there's some recruiters that really do pay off for international students. You basically pay them for the number of students that they bring here. And that is one of the things we are increasing to help us with this part. It's money well spent. So
But currently, enrollment wise, again, for fall, again, it's early, but
Yeah.
we're down 35% in the head
It's
count.
early.
I know, but
And students, they register to, they
Last
wait to the
minute.
last minute.
well, international can't wait till the last minute. They might have issues that keep them from saying, yes, I can come until the last minute, but they have to be planning ahead. And all of this, like the 1,400, 1,500 that we had at one point, was really, as you said earlier, Trustee Everett, a national thing. It was not us. It was nationally happening as basically a huge kind of bubble, and then it went down again. And so what we see frequently, if not always, reflects the national scene on what those students are doing.
there's a lot of reasons why they're decreased too. Gun violence is a big one.
In other countries, they're facing a recession. So that may be a factor too.
So again, this is we're predicting a reasonably large amount of revenue from these students.
I was curious why less for non-resident, not international.
Because they have, this.
Out of state.
Out of state, again, we're projecting, although we increased the rate 11%, the revenue is going to decrease from our adopted budget. Remember, our adopted budget was really high.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was just too high.
Mhm.
So those are, in
Those things
terms
to
of
look out for,
revenue,
Yeah.
the state is giving us more for a couple reasons. The hold harmless plus the hold harmless plus the COLA. And we're also doing well budgetarily with international and non-residents, mostly international. So that's the revenue side.
Right.
Expenditure side then is kind of also up in the air, because you see my big number 1 there. We didn't know what to put in there. In fact, we redid the budget multiple times in the last 6 weeks, not knowing what, 85% of our of our expenses are gonna be. And so we went with the highest number that is currently on anybody's proposal, which is 8% in 22-23. And 90% of COLA, which is around 7.4% next year. So,
And that was the projection that you gave us at that other meeting. That was based on the higher
Correct.
COLA,
I believe it is.
the
yeah.
5-year projection.
We've done so many, I want to say that it is, but that's where and we wrote the budget down,
Mhm,
thinking that it's tentative,
mhm.
capital T. There's lots of reasons why this could change.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
The state could give us a totally different budget than they proposed.
Mhm.
And we don't know what we're gonna settle on with salaries for the faculty.
Mhm.
Okay, so the rest of it are all mild compared to that, actually. They're
Right.
smaller amounts. Healthcare benefits are going up, but we've been saying that. We thought it was gonna be 10%. Our short-term employees, our adjusted budget went up quite a bit over the year. A lot of different offices are using short-term employees for a number of things.
Mhm.
Bringing back student workers.
Mhm.
This is an important one too. Number 7, we put in a contingency line, and this is not one of my favorite ways to budget, I would say. But we put in a contingency line of minus 1.6 million to recognize our inability to keep fully staffed.
mm,
So as you remember, this past year, we had like time and a half that more, 2-point-something million in salary savings.
savings,
Mhm.
right.
I think it was around 4%. Now we're budgeting for 2% salary savings. So that sort of lops off, of our expenses. Here's all the salaries, but we're just sort of saying 1.6 of that won't happen.
Mhm.
And so we have to be very careful if after our 14+% raise, if we get that we're not suddenly a more attractive and we've overstated what our savings will be. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think employment will still be hard for us. It is for almost every employer right now,
Mhm.
keeping fully staffed, but we'll have to be very careful of that too.
And so how does that factor into the current hiring cycle that we've had with trying to get, what do we have, like 14 faculty positions that we're trying to fill? How do these numbers work with that? Because we're still in process of hiring and onboarding.
Well, that's just one, the faculty is one component of it. And so we had successful recruitments and not successful recruitments. We're going to open the unsuccessful ones back up and see how we do. Across the board, we have that, some of our positions are filling, some of them aren't. So, but in total, we have more budgeted positions than we have people working here, by more than is normal. That's just the state of affairs right now. So
Okay, so I
that's
was
an important
wondering.
item, and it's not normally in the budget. Normally,
Oh.
you just have a variance, right? I budget $100, I spent 80, I have a $20 variance,
Mhm.
right? But now I'm saying, well, 10 of that I predicted, and so my budget's only maybe 90. So we're building it into our budget, which is not one of my favorite things to do. I've worked at places where you were given 90% of your salary budget, and the whole time of the year, you're thinking, well, it'd be nice if one of my employees were to find another job because I need that to meet my budget. But we're budgeting more globally here as opposed to passing out that 2% and sort of requiring, budget owners to achieve a savings in their salaries.
Right.
Because we seem to be doing that just with our inability to hire people.
Yeah, well, I was just saying, the reason I asked that question that way was because you said we had when we had those unfilled positions, we had this 4%. And now we're looking at a 2%. And I was wondering if that had anything to do with the fluctuations in the faculty that we are hiring. But if those two things are not related because of what you were saying, there's already this number and this 90%. And then if we do, hire at 80%, then we have that 10%, so it doesn't matter. So I was just trying to figure out where that 4% that you were saying when we didn't have the full employment of staff, but now we are gonna start hiring, but that 2% that we're locked off. So that was just a little bit confusing to me. That's why I was wondering if it had anything to do with the current hiring practices. But it sounds like you're saying it doesn't. So I'm confused.
It will have, we went out for 24 positions. We're gonna have on your July agenda, we're gonna have 17 probably. That will
That's
have
good.
made offers. I know, I'm excited. We've got, I think we're
Good.
gonna have, we're finishing up the last two. But I believe we are able to have 17 full-time faculty added. There are 7 either failed or delayed searches. So those may happen. Some of them are already going back out because of some issues. Some are being held because because 2 years in a row in the area of DSPS, the job descriptions we have not been able to hire.
Okay.
So I think they really need to look seriously at the job description because they can't get enough qualified candidates. That's just the faculty. In the meantime, other people have also said they're going to retire. So that's always a
Okay,
fluctuating.
Yeah.
right, yes, of course.
So that's happening on. And then HR is really trying to keep the hiring moving steadily. But we still
Yeah.
have a whole list of hires that
Mhm.
are as we work through them. So, yeah, there's always going to be this
Yeah.
change going on.
Yeah,
And that-
churn
that-
is, yeah.
That makes sense to have that line, that contingency line, because we're gonna always have openings available, and so there's gonna be budgeted monies not utilized because we don't have the staff, and then you have people retiring. So I think that that's actually realistic, and I think taking it from 4% to 2% is probably even more realistic, because as you were saying, our previous budget was a little too optimistic. And so we're trying to make things look a little bit more realistic and plausible. So that makes sense to me.
Well, yeah, I would add to that, that I'm really happy to see a recognition, whatever form you feel that needs to take, but having the recognition of the fact that we have historical rates of vacancies. If we look back, we can estimate any year what that should be. And we've had that discussion for the whole time I've been here, I believe. That the point is to make a realistic assumptions within your budget, and that includes vacancy rates. Because what was happening was when we didn't do that, people would say, oh, isn't it great? We have extra money at the end of the year. Well, that's
Yeah, right.
not a
It's
good
right,
thing.
yeah, it's
No,
not
you
extra
should
money
be
anyway.
aiming for the best realistic budget.
Okay, I just needed to get that clarity around the 4% and the 2%, and the fact that we're in this employment, churn, but okay, got it.
Some of the other things here, if I could, the number 4 annual step increases, 460,000.
What page?
I'm on page 4, item number 3. Under
Mhm.
expenditures, it's 460,000. So that's the cost for people going through the salary schedule,
Okay.
right? So you've been here 4 years and you go to 5 years, you go up a step.
Yes, yeah.
So that's that number, and that we budget that every year. There are a couple of other ones that I think are important to know. One of them, it says, and number 11, CalSTRS employee contribution rate increase, and it says 770 million. It's actually 777,000. So we've corrected that in.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a big.
I kind of knew that was a typo.
Another one, yeah, typo.
I wish we had that in our,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
could pay that out. That would be great for us, right?
That'd be quite an expense. The utility spending in number 12 is another one I wanted to highlight. So we're projecting, if we kept everything the same, our utilities will go up $600,000 next year. But we're making a concerted effort to get rid of buildings and we'll see, and to modernize our HVAC systems. So we've put in only 200,000 roughly in increase. So we'll see how we do, because we have some very inefficient HVAC, and we're heating and air conditioning buildings with very few people. So my goal is to get rid of as many of the temporary as I
Those
can. during the
structures,
year. And because some of those are some of the most inefficient place to. So anyway, that's a goal, sort of a reach goal, if you will. So those are the major things on the expense side. I showed over here, the total expenses are up 7.6 million. So we have our transfers here,
Mhm.
and they're the typical transfers. I have a couple of goals in there. Food service and the campus
Yeah.
store, which is slightly less this coming year than this year. But I'm really hoping that as we get more students on campus,
Uh-huh.
and as we do a few other sort of outreach things, that we reduce the subsidy. Both of those, neither of those should get a nickel. Those things should pay for
Right.
themselves.
Right.
In fact, when I was here before, those programs generated money that we took from them and they did things on the campus. Like they would make improvements to sidewalks or benches or whatever. And so you want to have these things be profitable where you can take that money and do other things, not give them money
Right, subsidized.
to subsidize food. And so the more students we have on campus, the more we can have the food service open longer and make more money. Right now, the cost of the labor is, we just can't afford to have them open as much as we want. So we don't have the food service that we'd like to have. So that's the kind of general story, if you will. Did you have a question? Yes, Beth?
I'm glad you brought up food service, because I noticed prior to COVID, their supplies and materials was about 156,000. But for the adjusted 22-23, it's almost 400,000. For,
Food service?
for their operating expenses and services.
What page are you on?
That would be page 10. Hold on. Yes. I'm sorry, yes. Am I looking at the wrong? Okay, I should have used a ruler. Okay, I stand corrected. Our expenses and services was 157, but it actually came down to just $53,000. So I'm okay with that.
And you're talking 157 is way over.
Yeah, I
4
didn't,
years ago.
I need to draw a ruler.
There you
so
go.
Keep my numbers, okay, but I like how we were able to get the supplies and materials at one point, am I looking at that right? Almost
What
over a
page
million,
are you?
page 10.
I'm looking.
You're looking way over fiscal year 1920 though. Here, that's before, that's, when COVID, that's before COVID or right, beginning of it. So you can look, the revenue was 2.8 million.
Mhm.
We're more than a million. We're half of that
Yeah.
now. And our expenses, went from
Should be half of
2.8
that.
to 1.4. So yeah, that's ancient history and, back when they actually would generate money. So
Well, I mean, I like to see what we used to
Yeah,
look
yeah,
like, because
that's
COVID is kind of this anomaly, right? Are we gonna always reflect COVID numbers? I doubt that.
I see we had a transfer in of 600,000.
Some things have changed. Clearly,
Yeah,
there's
so-
a
I'd really like
strong
to see us.
movement
I
toward
only want
online.
to get out of the 5-year time frame. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to be able to see what we used to look like
Right.
prior to COVID, so I can have a better appreciation of these assumptions that we're kind of going
Right,
towards.
right. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we have half the students on campus or not even quite half the students.
Right.
It's really, there's some differences.
Yeah, I mean, and you said we offered, what, 60% in person?
We offered it between the hybrid and in person, it was almost 60%. I think it was 58% of our schedule. We only ended up with 38% of our students this last spring in person.
so we went from 38 to 60%.
No, the actual schedule we put up
Uh-huh.
was about 60%
Mhm.
hybrid and in person. And the students registered and only 38% of the students ended up in person.
Okay.
So even though we offered the classes, the students opted more to be
Online.
online.
Yeah.
And we recognize that may hopefully settle out. We're hearing from the high schools that the students that are at the high schools right now want in-person classes because they've actually been back in high school in person.
Right.
That's what I've been hearing too.
So this will be interesting
Yeah.
the fall.
Brian, I have a question. It looked to me like we have a transfer into SEL as well. Not big, but
I think we do.
I think it
yes.
would be on this list here on page 5.
Yeah, I don't see it on there. It should be on there.
Okay.
Because I know we have a small one in.
Yeah.
The enterprise. Because if you look over to our transfers, 310 and the campus stores 275, so
Mhm.
yeah, it'd be $40,000 or something.
I think it's 35, but yeah.
So anyway, that's not on there.
So these are money that we're gonna transfer from these areas to reallocate somewhere else?
No, they're from the general fund into other funds.
Okay,
Into other funds and activities. So these lists, emergency program review, all of those, they are programs that are managed in another fund, not in the unrestricted general fund. So we move money over to the funds that they operate in.
okay,
The
okay.
bookstore or food service or self-insurance, things like that, so.
So on Thursday, not Thursday, when is our meeting?
Yes,
Yeah, Thursday. So you will have the SEL and that transfers list.
You're right.
listed. Okay.
I'll try to make the correction.
Yeah, I had a quick comment on the SEL. That right there was I have it fixed on our next version. That 35,000 should have been there in the first place. That's a holdover from perf dollars that we were doing for lost revenue.
Okay.
So when we rolled the budget, it rolled, and so I have it corrected. But I thought I had put in this latest version, so I apologize on that one. But that's why it's not on this. This list is, I think that the transfers that we looked at. Anyway, just want to make that clarification.
Thank you, Rudy. So we're not transferring 35,000.
Correct. Yeah, I was looking at it the other day, and so part of the art here is right. We're trying to do projected actuals at the same time looking at actuals, and I was reviewing it yesterday. So wait a minute, there's something here that doesn't make sense. So I fixed it on the next version of this one.
Good, thank you.
And I'll just make my usual comment, which is that for our facility maintenance programs, even though we got a chunk from the state, which they seem to be taking a chunk back, and that may put us in a good shape temporarily, I'm still concerned that we only transfer 650,000 when it used to be at least 2 million.
One of the
When you
things
talk
that,
about perspective.
right. Which is, I will say, a source of that money, places that I've worked before. A primary source of that end of the year is salary savings. So you budget for full employment. As people, some years you have more, some less. As you generate savings, that allows you then to the next year have that funding without. Anyway, so it's the same thing. It's just the ways that a lot of places have done it. And I understand if you put the salary savings in there and budget it, the exact same thing happens. Right? And if you don't hit the salary savings, then you can always draw it back or something. So
Right, but that's kind of a sleight of hand.
not really if
Do it
you,
that way.
well,
You know, oops, I saved it over here,
or.
so now I can put it into the.
Or you could also say it's a sleight of hand. I give you $100 for that person and I'm expecting them not to be here the whole year. So,
Well, now you've budgeted that in,
so
so you're telling us. that.
another way of looking at it is if that 1.6 million, I'm spending that money twice, right? I'm spending it once to hire a person and I don't expect them to all be there. And so I'll spend it again somewhere else. Right? So I've done budgeting a long time and I know that there's some schools that thought that does exactly what we're doing here and other places would think that's not appropriate. That if you should only budget money once. That even if you expect that I'm not going to fully do that, you want to get as accurate as you can.
Yeah,
But if you don't want to say, I'm counting on failure to keep my employees, right? I want to have every program I can to keep all my employees. And then I'm expecting that I won't get them all, so cut, a piece of everybody's budget saying that you won't be successful in. So anyway, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
So anyway, so that's the primary part of the budget I want to do was the general unrestricted. The rest of it, if we have questions, I can go through each one of them, but
Now, we
honestly,
need to go through
we've
each one.
done them pretty quickly.
Well, I have had.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mostly, well, yeah, on different ones. But I was looking at the restricted, which we
Yes.
usually don't spend much time on, and
Right.
there are some big changes over time.
Okay, what page are you on?
That's
Page
page 8. So for example, our federal revenues, 21, 22 actuals, now that could be what, COVID? It was 25 million and now we're down to 5-6 million.
Probably. I'm not sure exactly. I bet it is.
It's probably related to COVID.
And state revenues in 2021 were 33.6 and now we're 71. And we're 84 actuals, projected actuals. So I'm just curious what's
Okay.
shifting.
Right offhand,
Mhm.
Rudy, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's two, under the restricted funds, there's two, I say, areas or ways to look at least what I think the way we even presented here in the budget book. There are funds that are restricted, but the board has a great say in it, like HERF, right? Those were under the 12s. That makes sense. But there's a lot of others where funding fluctuates, like strong workforce, a huge part of what we have here. I mean, they're an enormous part. And that fluctuation would have to be its own analysis, but that's under the purview, right, of federal guidelines, et cetera, and state guidelines. But as far as the restricted ones that we can kind of talk to, those are presented towards the end. So some of those would be retention enrollment outreach. That's roughly 2.7 in state revenues for next year, we anticipate. You've got restricted health fees. That's in local revenues, about 700,000. And these that I'm referencing are towards the end of the budget book. Another one is the lottery fund. Lottery fund's in here. It's about 1.2 million roughly. We budgeted and we try to spend all of it. A few more here. Parking and transportation program. Local revenues 400, transfers in 225.
We're talking like,
You're talking state revenue, right?
well, not just state. I mean, if you look at the bottom line of total expenditures last year, 93 million, this budget would be 79 million. That's $13 million difference.
Which year are you under
Mhm.
2021?
I'm mostly, well, yeah, there were some 2021, but mostly 22, 23 to 23,
Okay, that's-
24.
Okay.
There are big differences. I mean, our
Hmm.
total revenues are what, 14.5 million less?
Mhm.
And our
So-
total expenditures are about 13 million less. That's
Mhm.
that's a lot of money.
Yeah, I'll give you one example. So for
What are the drops?
if you keep going through each one, the two last ones that we're going to touch upon, the second to last is the COVID-19 recovery block grant. If you look at, we received 7.6 million. We have that in the adopted budget, but that's part of where the clawback's going to be. So we don't have anything budgeted for 23-24.
Right.
So that right there, yeah, right. You have the uptick there, 7.5. And so I'd say that the 12 that we, those with the first two numbers of 12 towards the end of the budget book, right? Those are restricted funds that really are to Grayson under the purview of the board. The other ones, we'd have to do like a categorical analysis, and we could, but those really fall under very strict guidelines, like strong workforce, how they spend the money. A lot of it's a lot of pass-throughs with strong workforce.
Rudy, let me ask you,
Timing as well.
how many, it's been a while since I've looked at this, but how many different programs make up Fund 12?
Oh,
Well,
goodness.
80?
Yeah, that's about right, plus or minus.
Okay, so if you think of these are 80 separate grants that may change or disappear or be added, it's a really long list. So, and further in the budget book, we have that. So I think talking about it in sort of an aggregate is, we'll give you, here are the, however many programs there are. Here's what we got last year, here's what we're projecting next year. And so without that kind of detail,
Okay.
I mean,
Well, what that can get to is, are we, I mean, we're budgeting for a COLA. These programs didn't all get COLAs at the same rate. And are we losing money for a program that we feel is particularly important? In other words, is it being cut and we want to backfill it? And that we went through that with DSPS years ago. And it was a strong feeling of the college that we wanted to backfill the money we were losing from the state for DSPS, and we did out of the unrestricted general fund. We backfilled because we said it's an important program.
Right.
So I guess my question goes to, does that list of 80 programs include programs that we might feel similarly about?
which ones were funded, which ones are, some of them have people in them, some of them don't.
Right.
If you look at the, even just like on the projected actuals of 94 million, we only have about 13-14 million dollars of salary and benefits. And so most of that money is not.
Other operating expenses.
Right.
So we can,
Mhm.
I understand what you're saying. We can do further analysis and break that out and.
So you're asking for further analysis of what these 80 programs look like, and are there students inside of it?
Not students, employees.
Employees,
Well,
but are they
serving students?
Are they serving students? And
Yeah.
if they're not, same thing with the utilization of buildings. Do we need, right? You want to be a little bit more meticulous on our utilities as far as wasted expenditures on buildings that we're not using.
Or this could be the reverse, where we have students that are going to lose a program that we feel they should have.
Okay.
This has really grown over the years as we provided so
Oh,
many
yeah.
more services.
Oh, yeah.
So this is,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I just looked at the state portion of the report, we get almost $60 million this year in just categoricals alone. I mean, that's just categories, that's not talking financial aid, which is also.
Right.
We don't keep the financial aid in separate. Or
Yeah, we
do
do.
separate?
Yeah, we have a page for that.
Okay, so it's just that 60 million, just for the category. So the other pieces of it, we take a look at, there's a list, it's in the.
so, but we'll, again, I'm not sure how much we'll have by Thursday.
I'm not expecting for you to give me a list by Thursday.
Oh, no.
I mean, that's why we have this committee, right? So,
Yeah, no, it's
Like,
right.
hopefully we'll get that list, eventually. But I don't know about you, trustee Croninger, but I'm not looking for that list by Thursday, but it would be good to know and circle back to. So we want to, it's all about prudence and efficiency and being, no, but you know what, I, before we go any further, I just need to let you know, I do appreciate this report.
Yes.
I do.
It's Rudy's. Rudy did all the heavy
Rudy,
lifting.
thank you so much for this report. I read it a couple of times. I even have questions ready for Thursday to go. So I just want. So I just want to let you know, I appreciate this, and I like that you are open to providing us with more
Oh, yeah.
details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the actual budget document is quite a bit more extensive than this is just tentative, so. So we can
No,
go
I
on to a
appreciate
couple more real quick.
Okay.
On to interest and redemption, just so you're aware, this is the earlier bond majors that we had, that we borrowed money, general obligation.
Which number are you
I'm
on?
on page 9.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah, right here.
Right, and so on your property tax bill, you
Yeah.
have a certain line for this.
Mhm.
And that's collected and then paid every year. And so it runs a balance. It's like there's a timing difference of sort of 1 year's payments. This is about what our payments are every year, and we end the year with about that same amount. So if there's a timing difference there, but we pay around $4.5 to $5 million in interest and principal. Because the way bonds work is some of them, they mature at different times. So you pay off those ones and you pay interest on the others. So as it goes, they go away, and in the end, you're finished. So so we have several more years, I'm sure, of that. And that's what that, so just so you know what that bond redemption fund is. Food service is the next one.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I noticed that the number hasn't changed. Is that's intentional?
They try to make that reasonably, when you do a bond measure and they structure the bonds that you sell, they do it so the homeowner has kind of a constant bill.
Right, that makes
Right,
sense.
to the whole time.
Right, because I
So,
don't want mine.
yeah, so you'll have, so as, even though the outstanding bonds shrink, the payments will stay.
And that's why the numbers.
And you
Okay,
get, we get to keep the interest rate, which then was much lower. Things are going down.
They sold the bonds at whatever
Yeah.
they could get at that
Yeah.
time, and the bonds are in, various interest rates that give
Yes.
you a sort of an average for the group
okay,
they sell. But yes, that's where and those were good years back then, it's much more expensive to do it today.
yes,
It's still always good compared to what you can get out, what we can do.
okay.
And the interest rates are fixed, right? They're not.
Not everybody's fixed.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, they're
Put up
fixed.
a-
Right, whatever we sold the
So
bonds for.
that's why
we
they're
had
able
the-
to be consistent.
Right.
Okay,
Say a
Okay.
bond costs $1,000 and everybody has a
Yeah,
coupon
got it.
rate of 4%. That means you're gonna pay 4%
Got it.
every year on that until 1 year you redeem that coupon, that bond. So that's how that's figured. Okay, so the next one is food service.
Mhm.
Again, it's not where we want to be, but it's the best we can be. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question there. Here in these funds, it seems to me to make more sense to use the projected actuals than the adjusted budget, which has not necessarily caught up. And we are using that now for the ending fund balances. We're using the projected actual. So the other things, looking, for example, at local revenues, it's 670, which was the adjusted budget. It seems to projected actuals are quite higher. So,
So you're thinking that
yeah,
Why do you think we should use the projected actuals and not the adjusted budget?
because the projected actuals are where we are coming, we think we will come out at the end of this year.
Mhm.
And as we move to next year, I mean, even ignoring the 1% hopeful increase,
Mhm.
understand.
it would make sense.
So you think the numbers for the 2023-24 actually should be a little bit higher if we use the projected actual?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. They would be higher.
yeah,
Okay.
As would the classified salaries,
okay.
I think. Now, that one doesn't match either one. So there, maybe there's fewer people. I don't know what's going on there.
I'm not sure a lot of time was put in. We've been
Yeah,
spending almost all of our time trying to figure out the restricted general fund. Honestly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Rudy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I think these are
Yeah.
very preliminary.
Yeah, usually this one here, we get more definition like during this month that they actually start to see the trends. So this is, we're probably a little bit behind about a week or two getting together. There's a specific accountant who oversees this, so I just got to get with her to update these numbers. So I know last year went through a lot of updates, and I agree. I was kind of surprised too that the actuals came in so well. So it was great, fantastic. So we'll get this dialed in more. That's a great point. We have more information now. Because I think, remember, when we looked at it was probably about a month and a half ago, right, Brian, where there was a presentation on food services, and I think they just had older information.
We're doing everything we can to
Mhm.
sell more,
right.
you know,
Well, it
stay
looks like
open.
we did well.
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
Maybe it
I
is.
know. I went a few times, so that's probably what impacted.
Yeah,
a little
that's
bit.
what did it.
Yeah, that's what did it. But also, I mean, as we had observed, the students are slowly getting back to a campus culture of being present on campus. So obviously, that's going to feed into
Right,
food
right.
services and of course, at end of the year finals time, and they're really kind of huddling and doing their study groups and stuff. So, you know, so that looks good. But I was gonna say the other thing too, I really appreciate that you guys are trying to turn this around with so many moving parts. And we just got the May revise. So, I mean, you're still kind of figuring that out. So, I mean, I get it that a lot of these numbers are tentative, and also we had to reschedule this meeting because we didn't have all the numbers. So, you know, we're moving along. We're just kind of trying to see where we are and ask questions, but we get it, that it's a moving target. And, you know, some of the information is still coming in. So understood.
So I noticed on all of the budgets for the various funds, there's a line that says, was it other operating expenses and services? On some budgets, there are various numbers. Are we kind of tightening that up too, to kind of reduce those other operating expenses and services?
Like where, for example?
All of it.
Like
Each
line
budget has
58,
that.
I see, yeah,
Each
that's what
one
I'm
has
saying.
that line.
But I mean.
Yeah,
there's the-
Well,
it's a roll-up of, it's the
Oh, yeah.
5,000s, it's a whole
50
group
for
of
food
different
service.
kinds of.
Yeah,
expenses.
I'm
They're not
sure.
like miscellaneous in one category, there's a whole bunch of different.
Okay. But we're kind of trying to,
It's like
do we have a
miscellaneous.
strategic plan to kind of tighten up that area in the future?
Well, some of those are, we spend money there, I mean, it's, none of that is,
It's sort of like miscellaneous, like you don't know what's coming, you know, it's like
Yeah.
other expenses come in.
It's
based
not-
on the-
it says
Conference or
other, but
whatever.
it's Rudy, help me here, but it's a list of items.
Yeah, I'll give you,
that are
just to give
used
you a sense.
To roll up to a
Yeah.
thing called other.
Yeah, for food service, just give you a sense of kind of stuff in there. So, laundry and cleaning, contracts, bank fees, actually a lot of bank fees there.
Right,
So that gives you a sense, of the kind of stuff that is in there. What else? Mainly contract. Contract is always a big one in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just only, because for instance, when you look at the other expenses and services line 50 or the restricted fund 12, back in 2019-20, it was $20 million, and for the adjusted 22-23 it was at 54.
Oh, yeah. So I think that
So-
one, if I'm understanding what you're, okay, so you're looking at 21,304, right?
Yes, I'm looking,
2024. So I think
page?
my recollection, I think when we talked about this in our MD&A,
Food services.
across the board, in the
Yes.
financials, go back a couple of years,
Yeah.
when we looked at 2021, that was the shutdown of the campus.
okay,
That really impacted a lot, like laundry and other contracts.
okay,
And then you see it kind of ramp up. Now,
okay,
I would be more concerned about, well, 1920, right? That's when we were serving a lot more students. That's that baseline 12,614. So if we get back to there, we could see these numbers. I don't know. I don't have a sense for that. But I think 157, that's a lot.
my only reason why I kind of point that out is because we have less students now, but
Mhm.
I'm just using it as an example. We have
Yeah.
less students now, but our operating expenses, I'm on page 8. I'm referring.
Oh,
to
yeah.
Restricted general fund, fund number 12. We have less students now, but our operating expenses and services is a lot higher if you compare it to prior to the pandemic. So.
Yeah, I'd say on that one, just my thought as I look at some of these numbers, I think some of these are not a linear function, some of them are a step function. Some of them, it's like a range. It's I kind of want to have some time to do the analysis, like, when you look at operating expenses, it takes care of probably a range of student population from like 8,000 to 10,000. And then the next step would be like the next part. On some of that's why I've seen some of these expenses, like it's a range, like of the student population.
Yeah.
so again, you're on Fund 12, which is the 80 programs, and some of those programs.
Oh,
Student, strong workforce, it may have.
yeah, I
given
have
us-
a number for you. I just added them up.
Right,
At least in terms of adopted budget, just if I just look at that column, it's 120 separate funds, not separate programs, but separate funds. Strong workforce includes a lot of it, just to give you a sense of the magnitude. If you look at the adopted budget, they just adding them up, it's almost $40 million.
Strong workforce. in
Strong
fund-
workforce just alone, and then you have a bunch of other ones, but that just to give you a sense. And then the other thing to give context around some of the 12, like strong workforce, they have stuff that goes like, they have like these things of odd years, even years, and so they're constantly rolling them over, and so the dollars are dedicated for a particular year, and they really have to manage them using this method of odd years and even years. I wish Tanya were here, she could give more explanation on that. So, but anyway, as far as dollars, hopefully it gives a sense of, we've got almost 40,000 just a strong workforce, and that's spread across multiple funds that are used to manage the distribution of those revenues.
Okay.
Yeah. I also think that, and I didn't explore this enough to understand it yet. In our budget sustainability work group, that George commented that our other operating expenses were equivalent to a much smaller college. So we may be low in those relative to a college of our size, but I didn't follow that up to understand fully what he means yet.
Part of it is when COVID hit, a lot of the travel and conferences, which is in the 5,000 other operating expenses, was cut out of the budget. And this last year, we put a fair amount of it back in, but that was cut.
Well, that was
Pretty
cut
drastically.
before COVID,
Yeah,
just on
and
the
that-
basis of the ongoing deficit.
But it sounds like this college hasn't put a lot of money into that, even prior, but
Yeah.
even during COVID, that was one of the first ones to
Yeah.
get cut. So, yeah, that's one of the things we've been trying to ramp back up again.
It feeds into this whole thing that we're more than 85% salaries, benefits, right? So when that comes down, other areas go up because it's just a percentage. And so we are low on our sort of maintenance investment, not investment, but all the other things we do. We're high on salaries and benefits. If everything is relative and it's an expensive place to live, so everybody would say, what's he saying? Low on salaries and benefits, we can barely live here, right? So, but it's relative. So, but that's one of the reasons why those numbers are low, because we spend all our money on people.
Yes,
Yeah, elsewhere.
yes, yeah, okay.
So if I can, so these, again, emphasizing that these are pretty preliminary numbers.
Okay,
And we spent most of our time working on the other parts of this, and we will refine these as we go from now until the actual adopted budget.
okay.
Will make significant improvements. If I could go to page 13, I'll show you.
I have
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Page
Yes, of
11, I'm
course, yes.
sorry. That's, page 11 is Child Development Fund.
Mm-hmm.
And just from a policy perspective, I was concerned that our transfers in were lower and our revenues were lower. When we should be paying more, I assume.
Okay.
Or at some point, the COLA aspect would kick in somewhere. Anyway. From a policies perspective, I just look at this program as extremely important for our students who have children. And for faculty as well, but for students in terms of enabling them to come to college.
Trustee Cruncher, when you say transfer, you're talking about line number 89?
Yes,
Okay, and when you go into the projected actuals for 22 to 23, it's 260,000 as compared to
200.
prior years. You believe that number should be higher?
Well, that's my concern. Are we cutting this program back? Are there going to be fewer children that we can accommodate? How is it that we're reducing this money?
I'll see, we'll look into it.
Okay.
Sure.
So the transfer ends is the transfer ends of money
It's
from.
$60,000 less than last year.
From unrestricted
In the budget.
general fund.
We'll find out.
Okay,
It just looks like what Rudy said earlier, these all haven't been updated. yet.
Right, right.
I think we were struggling with,
Yeah.
so
I-
struggling is not the right word, but.
Well, the good thing is you have it, Marcia, I like that you have those highlighted, so when the updates come in, you can.
Yeah, I can
easily make
Right, and I'm making note to make sure that we do the best.
Okay.
So, if I could go to page 13. this way,
Sure.
Highlight the part that is highlighted, which I want to make sure you see.
Reappropriation.
So reappropriation. So this past year, we got $9 million from the state in this. And you see the 9.4 above there, 22, 23. And so we're taking 4.9 of that.
Mhm.
And so we had set up projects for all of that in our construction fund. And so we've zeroed those out and that money is just sitting there. So it'll fall to fund balance. And so there's 4.9 here and there's 4 million in the COVID relief block grant, which is another page back here.
So this way we can fix the potholes?
And so this is, yeah. This is
Brian, does this
money
mean
that
we
we
can
were,
fix the potholes?
No, it's the other way around. We can't fix as many potholes or something.
right, exactly.
Or something.
Yes, exactly. There's a variety of projects we're doing. But one of the things that I'm working on now is to better understand all the projects and the money that's in this fund. And I hopefully will be able to bring to you a more detailed presentation of here's the money, here's the things that we're doing. So if you think of, we have $20 million in there, say,
Mhm.
by the end of the year, 20.251.
Right.
So about 7 something of that is the P building. 7, so that makes it 13. The 5 of that is money that we're taking back, right? So that takes that 13 down to 8. Right, we're working on a number of projects right now. I want to say about 2 million. So we have about $2 or $3 million that's still not started there, but not a lot. Right, if you think there's 20 there, it shrinks down to just a couple million very quickly that we
Right,
don't have
right.
sort of active efforts to do.
Is the moldy temp building one of the projects that's in?
It's
here?
in there, it's about, I think we've budgeted around $350,000 to move everybody out and tear the building down.
So that's gonna come out of this.
This fund, yes, it is.
Okay.
And all of it.
We should do that.
Oh, yes, exactly, yes. But
Okay.
rather than spend 500,000 to bring it back to being an
Right,
old
yeah.
temporary building, we're
Yeah.
gonna use that money to get people back into permanent. So,
Okay,
Yeah, we
I have
discussed
a
that. Good idea.
question on page 12 or a comment.
yes.
anyone? And that is that
Mhm.
it appears to me that what we're doing in the equipment fund is basically spending down the residual ending fund balance from the previous year rather than keeping up where we were.
We're looking, when we did the budget originally, we had a much bigger transfer over there. But they have a number of things that we still haven't bought that's in the money there, so that's one of our reductions.
Okay,
Exactly that, to let them spend that down. We have a lot of needs there as well.
Mhm.
well, that's what was my concern. Are we shorting them? Because I know, for example, the refresh is kind of slow
We can.
in the computers.
Right.
What is it now? 7 years?
We think of it as more efficient.
I think
Sorry.
that's a shame.
No,
And
but
how-
that's one of the things we're,
I know, the 85% and the,
So I heard you mention, trustee Croninger, the computers. That makes me think of our broadband services and our repository services. If we could maybe beef that up, for example, the students are looking to utilize the database, the library database, when you're doing research. is that more, have we updated that? So they have more access to more research, journals and periodicals in our database? Has that been upgraded in addition to, sounds like, our computers?
I have no idea. I can look into that.
That, yes, it has been upgraded, plus the California Community Colleges keeps all of our internet connection, broadband. That's all set up through the state. And they make sure that all the colleges are brought to a certain, so
It's just our computers to get in or.
it's the computers we actually have in staff and faculty offices that are old. The library they do a really good job over there. Plus, the Foundation for Community Colleges gives us, they have a consortium, making sure that we have everything that, like all the research databases and all of that, so.
Yeah, but if we could just look into it on the last time, kind of beef that up.
Well, it's a good question. We lost subscriptions when we were trying to cut for the deficit, just like we lost conferences and professional development.
I have as a question, we'll see.
I didn't mean to add to your list, but.
No, it's fine. That's why we're having the meeting. It's a list generating meeting.
Okay.
So, but I do understand your point too about us not giving equipment, same way with vehicle.
Yeah.
replacements and Stuff, we can't fix everything.
Right.
We recognize the issues.
Okay.
We're trying to spend wisely the money we have,
Right,
and set up some processes so that we,
as we prioritize, we kind of keep an eye on the things that are like, right, need to do right now, and then the other things that are like right behind it in the queue, but they have to be done too. In the queue have to be done too.
So are you on 14 yet?
Yeah,
Yes,
because I had a
have
question about
questions.
14.
14 is another one where
I was
We
talking,
got a,
trustee Croninger.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I
I
was
didn't
saying I
hear you.
had a question about
Sorry.
14.
go.
Okay, so I was just curious because I know that we use the system where students don't have to buy textbooks, right? We use the,
Online something resources, yeah.
yeah, and that's fairly new for us. Maybe how long did we implement? 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, they've been implemented.
So then I was assuming, wouldn't that bring costs down for the bookstore? They don't have to buy the books for the students to purchase? Would that impact somehow, like generate a cost savings via the bookstore? I was wondering. Because we now are doing we're requiring less textbooks that have to be purchased.
Well, I guess I would say upfront that I'm not sure that it's widely used yet.
Okay,
So that would be my first statement, because I know we have a really great coordinator who's been doing a lot of work on it. And we still don't have faculty that use the OER yet. So I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say we're still basically book heavy at our college. I don't think we've really made a big transition where OER is the primary resource. And there probably are very few colleges that have made that switch yet. There are some that are ahead of us, but they're trying to get our faculty to move to more of the OER. The Open Educational Resources is what it's called. I'm sorry, I forgot the OER.
That's okay.
it's called OER.
Yeah, it's OER, Open Educational Resources.
Okay, but we paid for it.
Everybody paid.
Yeah, because I saw we had to vote on that.
I was just wondering, I know we on page 13, Brian just mentioned reappropriation, but we never really got, are you done with that part? Did you want?
Sure, I just wanted
Call
to
us
show
out
that
to that.
that's where we've taken that 4.9 million out of our project list and set it aside. And so it's still in fund balance, which if the governor's budget turns out, what we'll do is we'll move that 4.9 back from the equipment or from the construction fund and back into the unrestricted general fund, and that will be one of our sources of revenue to pay our salaries and benefits and everything for next year. And the same way with the COVID block grant.
Okay, got it.
So,
Why
They
wouldn't
would-
it go back into the fund it came from?
well, it came from the state directly to us.
Right, but I
Yeah,
mean,
those
it's,
are- yeah.
it's in the 22-23 projected actual.
And only as a sort of, we've set it there.
It's a designation.
Oh, yeah, so,
It
I'm
was
sorry,
maintenance.
I'm sorry, it is being shown as an expense here, right? So,
Projected actual.
right,
Yeah, so.
it is not, we've just set it aside, it's not being,
It's not an expense.
it's not been spent, it will,
Right.
it's in fund balance, but it's not showing the way we presented it.
Right.
And projected to show, okay, 53%, yeah, savings, so, yeah, so it's not being saved there, right, so.
Right,
So
but
it's
we,
designated for something, right?
It is just set aside
Just
now,
set in there.
pending in the next 2 weeks to find out what they're gonna, how they're gonna fund.
But it's not an expense,
It
right?
is not an
Yeah.
expense.
Okay.
It is not. It's set
Okay.
aside. We just wanted to show that's the sort of the impact on this fund is that, and that was the only way we could figure out to do it. So,
right,
Right,
and you,
okay.
and you've got a zero in the
Right,
budget, so
right,
that's
right,
what happens. if
exactly,
They
that's-
take it.
Okay, that makes
sorry,
sense.
Sorry,
Okay,
again.
good.
Yeah.
Not quite ready. for
Yeah.
this. Okay, so then moving on, if I could, then
On 14?
14, yes.
Yeah, we were talking about 14 and it's
Right.
just, there is a real drop in the budget, both revenue and expenses here. And I'm just wondering what the thinking is on that.
Probably no thinking. It's probably just trying to get this done. We haven't had a chance to.
Okay. May change.
Is it fair to say that most of, because when I was looking at it, most of these
Are like that.
are like that.
We just,
Yeah, it hasn't been
Okay.
reconciled yet. Yeah. Okay.
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 a
But
placeholder,
like I said, I'm
Like,
glad
yeah.
you got the questions because when they
Yeah.
do the reconciliation, when they do
Right.
reconcile the budget and do the refresh, then we can take a look. It'll make sense. Okay.
Yeah, same thing with
Yeah.
SEL, because
Right.
like, they don't seem to have
right,
their increases and whatever.
Right.
Okay.
so the last one that I wanted to point out, the rest of them, I think they're all.
Yeah.
The next one, the one I wonder, and I don't have it here, we've done it in. So which was the financial, the COVID block, grant, which I don't think. I think it was part of the supplemental grant.
We did.
Yeah, I thought I saw it.
It is page,
I thought,
And again, it's the same way where I'm just showing that, wanted to show that we had the
Page 30.
okay, thank you.
the reappropriation, the 4 million.
Yes.
So we
Right,
received, and this is the big one actually, because we got $7 million and we had, quite an ambitious plan for that over the next few years. And we've been doing a lot already. You can see the things we've done above that there. That we've spent $1 million something. So we're taking, 90% of what's left, basically. Saying, and there's nothing budgeted for next year because we don't know. We have $1.8 million after the 4 million, but we've not budgeted any of that yet because we just don't know what.
Right.
And that's, those are the types of things that really can make a difference, right? That's money they gave us one time. We're trying to do. One of the last things if I could, on page 31. The facilities rentals, and this is one of the things we're gonna bring to the board. I'm hoping next week. We're trying to change, there's a program that we've always had, community services, where we rent out parts of the campus for weddings or whatever. And that was money that we got, and then we sort of took it and did other things with that money. And I'm really trying to grow that enterprise, if you will, to
It's a good idea. Such a
leave
great
some of the
idea.
money in that group so that they can better fund and better be prepared for weddings or whatever.
Yeah.
So, because there's real money in this, there really is. And we've always not funded that. We've just sort of said, allow people to use an overlook or this or that, and we charge them $500. But if we were to invest in that
Yeah.
and really use our assets, we can do a lot more. And so I'm trying to have them keep their keep their fund balance, reinvest it.
It's solid, yeah.
And really, and so we've moved this under the bookstore, and so they're kind of trying to do the bookstore, catering and food service and renting things out, all as one sort of events, organization, which I think we have the potential to make a lot of money there if we're aggressive and also fund them, capitalize them
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe where we have our own portable restrooms, we can pull out to,
Right.
just for a wedding and then
Yeah.
take it back or something like that. So, or a bunch of different things we can have.
I really wanted to add to that too, because, as you were talking, I'm just reflecting back on our, gala and how just, it was a beautiful day after the horrible weather for graduation.
We had sun.
But it really speaks to that because, and you were saying we can make money, but for me, the big draw is that the community appreciation and engagement. That's where the real hook is for us because, and not only that, but as people are on the campus, they get to see where the needs are, that, so when we ask for money or a bond or something, they get, oh yeah, we're not the only ones that are getting our tires punctured with the, potholes and stuff, but they see the older buildings, they see the wear and tear, right? As they're walking around the campus. But because of the beautiful setting and people appreciate the college, those kinds of events instill a real sense of like ownership and and the community feels like, they're part of it. So I think that's one of the biggest, in addition to the revenue, obvious revenue stream.
I agree with you. One of the things though that I really want a little bit of variation what you're saying is that it's really hard for us to go and ask for money if our place looks like we've let it run down. So
Ooh, that's
in my opinion, we need to, that's why I would say.
Okay, just have like 2 potholes instead of 5.
We need to repay, we need to do some of the things before we ask for money, because we can't make it look like we let it run down and now we
Right.
to help us. We need to have it look decent. And the reason we're asking for money is to, provide new programs and water facilities and things like that, not because we can't figure out how to manage and pave the road.
Okay.
That's my
Okay.
view of it.
Yeah, that's a good,
I agree, which is why I keep talking about more money for me.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
so that's why, and I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, finish.
Well, and in the board agenda, and we talked about with facilities group, I've listed a group of things that I think that we have to do. One of them is paving. And the paving estimate is around $4 million for just the main campus and just the main driveways and the shot center. So that's number one, that's $4 million. The second one is outdoor lighting.
Yes.
Our campus has a lot of areas where if you look at the lighting now, sometimes and the light is on in the middle of the day, that light is on because we can't turn it off because the system that turns them on at night and off during the day is no longer. And in some of the other ones where you see the light never comes on, the conduit has been crushed or rusted out, the light, we can't change the light bulb and make it work. So that's about another $1.5 million to actually redo our lights. And that's a big deal, because there's some parts of the campus, there's just no lights.
Yeah, and that's not good.
So that's number two. Another one is at the Wake Center. The fire marshal has come to us and said that when somebody else built the Wake Center, the elementary school district built the Wake Center, there's a fire hydrant across the street, across Turnpike. And that was sufficient. Today, we have 20 buildings behind it, and it's not sufficient for them. And so we need to put in 2 fire hydrants on that property, one on each side. And that's another $1 million. And there's one last one. The city has a grant to improve lift drop. And so part of that grant, they've come to us and said, we know that you want to improve the entryways for West and East Campus, but that'll be on your dime. So we have estimates. We've redesigned the main campus on the East Campus to make it have a stoplight. It only has one driveway. It has the bus pulling in, because there's gonna be a bike lane that runs down Cliff Drive. And we don't want to let people off on the street side of the bike lane,
Mhm.
which is sort of what would be. We want them to, and so we've reconfigured that side, put in a stoplight, and on the west campus, put in stoplights. And that's about another $4 million.
Okay.
So if you add all of those up, that's about $11 million of projects. Just to do things that I think we need to do.
Yeah, no, I.
Paving being the highest priority in lighting.
Mhm. Yeah.
I didn't notice that in the transfer.
Wait,
It's not in there. That was in the discussion we had yesterday and a discussion I was hoping to have next week.
what I didn't notice on the budgets, depreciation information.
So what,
Because usually on budgets, there's a line that shows the depreciation.
so, okay, we don't budget, so for like
don't
equipment, we
include-
don't
include that.
appreciate,
Okay,
now. That's a
We're
good
not
thing
doing-
though.
we don't-
Budget.
We don't pay taxes, which
Right,
is a
right.
lot of reasons
Which do
for
you
doing
do?
depreciation.
So, but at the same time, depreciation is something, if we did manage our equipment, our vehicles and all that.
that's what I was,
That would be our depreciation calculation would be what we would then turn around and fund. Right, so that when that equipment. Computers, servers, trucks, lawnmowers are past their useful life, we would have money in the fund. To buy new ones. And we've never done that.
Roofs, painting.
yeah, that's why I was,
Well,
I didn't see that, so maybe we were calling it something else.
Right, no, we don't have that in our budget.
I
Okay,
don't have a total cost of ownership. That's one of the things that needs to be done.
We have
Okay.
somebody with a hand up. Art.
I'm sorry.
Olgan has.
Art.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm glad to hear, Brian, that you're talking about some initiatives to try and use the facilities in entrepreneurial ways to the extent that we legally can do that. And the weddings and photography and that sort of stuff is, we've got a wonderful site. I'm also thinking that we should be bringing in our academic programs and our voc programs, for example, the culinary arts, hospitality, and so on, to have students become experienced in catering or
Yes.
other types of services that might be able to be aligned with the weddings and et cetera. Hotel recreation, culinary, all of those things, could fit in very nicely. However, we have to be considerate of something, and that is something that because I was, making these kinds of suggestions 25, 30 years ago, and Jack Friedlander said, well, we have an agreement. He said, we can't do this. He would say that a lot, actually. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, we have an agreement with the restaurants in the city that we're not going to be doing
Competition.
things that would compete with them. And so I, sort of backed off, but I do think that it's worth pursuing again. And to the extent that we can get our programs, or if we need to develop some programs that would both draw in FTES as well as provide an opportunity for entrepreneurial revenue, then I think that would be a good thing. If I could just give one other suggestion. I was at a theater this past weekend. The Metropolitan Opera does a monthly performance. It's a simulcast. So in New York, they're doing the live performance, and then they simulcast it to theaters around the world. And we have one here in Santa Barbara. And I've thought for years what we should be doing is we should be tying in our music program, or have some sort of discussion after the performance. And it could be on the topics of, music, or historical or costuming, the theater department to come in and to because you've got a captive audience of, let's say, even just 100 people who are watching the performance, and these are seniors for the most part, and I think an opportunity to provide that as a community service as well as potential generation of FTE would be a good thing. Similarly with conferences, I think that this is a wonderful site for, and we've got facilities to host workshops and conferences and so on. And I think that that would be, again, some revenue generation. And I think that we need to be working more or thinking more entrepreneurially. Anyway, thank you.
Art, before you go, I was wondering, are you thinking about the, it was reminding me of one of the plays that I saw during COVID with the theater. And so we were, I was able to watch the play at home that was being performed in the theater. And it, I really enjoyed that. So are you talking about something like that where we can monetize something that's already being done? Or was this something else that you were just?
No, I was actually, what I was referring to was actually in one of the theaters, the Metro 4 on State Street.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Where you had 100 people in an audience watching a performance, and you've got a captive audience there. And it seems to me that if somehow we could build in some sort of academic program,
Okay,
To talk
I
about
got
it.
you. I see.
even on a community service basis, I don't know
Yeah.
what,
That sounds great. Okay.
register and do a discussion, a 45-minute,
Right,
50-minute
yeah.
discussion
Okay,
afterwards.
that too. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So I'm familiar, other campuses I've been on have very active in entrepreneurial ways to use their, when I was in LA and El Camino, we were a primary filming location for everything, from the football field to our nursing facilities were used in dramas and things like that. Our central plant was used in other kind of movies. So we filmed we took pictures of everything. And since it was close to Hollywood, it was a primary
Right, yeah.
filming location, and we made a lot of money from that. And I see here as our primary outside areas, a great asset that we're trying to
Yeah.
get. But we
So-
need to capitalize that effort so that when they come here, we're not just saying it's the grass. No, we
Right.
actually have a program to give them.
The program.
If they need a microphone and we
Yeah.
have it. If they need a little stage, we have it. If they need bathrooms, we have it. So,
Yeah.
and we have food.
You mentioned the culinary as part of
And
that.
I think I mentioned this to Dr. Murillo before I was elected, in one of our meetings of getting to know each other. I was saying, why we don't have us known to have a stellar hospitality program? Like, I didn't understand. We're a port of call for these cruise ships. Why don't we have some type of top of the notch hospitality program, internship for our students with the existing hotels, with the cruise ships? And the campus can also be known as, if you want to have your event here, because we have this well-known hospitality program. So
And recreation and tourism.
yeah, it makes sense.
We used to.
We used to.
We're talking 10+1 here to a certain degree.
What's that
The academic senate is the place to be talking.
about these kinds of?
Not to the
These
accounting,
things.
but I understand what you're saying.
Well, I'm looking from a capital standpoint, so it's still financial.
But I do believe we have an opportunity to do a lot with our facilities.
Yes.
One of the things where I was in a meeting earlier today down at Pershing Park is that we have the baseball field down there. We have a championship baseball team. We have the Foresters, who are championship, and they are playing in one of the worst baseball facilities in the state. They use Star. And because we compete against what they call are the season ticket holders, which are the people who live in the park. And so I was just down there earlier today, we're trying to figure out how we can change our relationship with the Foresters and the city to actually invest in that and make it available that we can rent out for other activities, right? Because right now, it's barely passable as a baseball, when we're doing it. So if we were to invest in that, maybe even turf the outfield, you could have another field that we can always rent another field there, tight supply. We could always rent a softball or a baseball field if it's nice and, so anyway, there's a lots of opportunities.
Potential,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure.
With the city, with other. So we're the infancy of that, but we're talking to the foresters because they're just getting ready to start their season down there. And we're looking at all the things that they're needing us to help them with. I'm saying, because they're not an investor in it, because they're just a 2-month tenant. We need them to feel ownership. In the place and also help us to find investors for them to invest in.
Mhm.
But, as you all were talking, I included, I just started thinking it's also a really good enrollment
Booster.
Potential, yeah, because it's, as people are here and doing all these things, they're like, oh, I can send my kid there, or the kid's coming as, I'd like to go there. So, again, that whole community outreach and that community engagement is so important, but also enrollment, potential is just so rich there. So I'm really excited about these entrepreneurial possibilities and conversations.
You have more questions?
Well, I was just back to the potholes and your
Yeah.
list.
4 million.
I'm with you on the potholes.
I was
I'm ready to.
When you said the potholes were $4 million,
Uh-huh.
I was going to ask if page 24
Okay.
of our anticipated expenses, state maintenance was going to go for potholes or what?
No, those are the schedule, mostly the scheduled maintenance projects that we have.
So how are we going to pay for
Potholes.
the potholes and the rest of that list?
That was all things that I was talking to them about, asking for the undesignated reserve. Which I know was
But again, prioritizing, we're gonna have to, as a.
I know, but I
We cannot
really
say-
wanted that
I
for
know,
student
I know.
programs.
we cannot spend
There-
scheduled
that's
maintenance money.
right.
Students, it was for
Yeah, wait a minute.
students.
Well, how those
I wanna hear
potholes
what-
help students?
What were you saying about?
We cannot spend most of the money in this fund that's available, other than the PE building,
Mhm.
is scheduled maintenance money, and you cannot use scheduled maintenance money
On student
for
programs.
parking or roads.
Oh. That's, really? That's
Yeah.
maintenance,
You can use it for roads.
For
You can't
roads.
Use it for.
but not for the parking.
For
Do
parking.
we have roads on campus?
Not many, I mean, not, if you could go from the street to the first parking lot.
Well, those are some.
Which
big
it needed.
potholes.
Needs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's- because
The
that's-
big ones are there, the big ones are.
So, so
Okay, well, we gotta
that's the
figure out
reason
a way to
I'm
pay for that.
I'm going very delicately with this list of
Yes.
things, because I also know that we have, $20 million in our fund, and I'm trying to show that we are working on all of those projects, and there's a lot of, things that we need to convert the fund balance of this fund into extra facility, lighting, new HVAC, painted buildings, all of that. I'm really trying to push that effort.
As we're talking, it seems to me, and that we need to have a audit and financial committee retreat. Not a retreat, but a place where it's like, some of these areas that we don't have all the detailed information where we can have, all that stuff, like in the other expenses, and we have these 80 programs where, we can kind of plan to get all that information together and then be able to talk a little bit more strategically and plan for some of these entrepreneurial ideas we've been raising. And then, so that when we're not looking at a tentative budget, but we're looking at, at some point where, here's where we are year's end, fiscal year end, or whatever. And then we can meet to try to plan a little bit better and have a little bit more specificity in some of these conversations, and it's not so tentative. So, I mean, I would like to propose something like that for our committee. Does that
Well,
sound?
there's a,
I thought that's the plan. It's just on the long list of
Right.
other
I
stuff
haven't
that
seen it.
we asked him to troubleshoot.
We will, address the issues that you've raised here, be as specific as we can. And then that's just a tentative budget still, and then when the budget is brought out, it'll take us a little while, we'll put together the adopted budget, it'll take us a while to figure that.
Yeah, something like
But all of this is
September, August.
incremental. I will come back to you with
September.
more specificity and all of the money and the equipment fund, what we want to do with that. There's lots to do.
Yeah, something that's not like
And
one of these.
hopefully we
meetings.
settle with our
Oh my
latest
Special
gosh.
meeting.
because because we need everybody sort of on board helping us to do all these.
Right,
things. So
right, yeah. Okay,
that's a big task there.
We have a budget update.
The last one.
I don't
yes.
know if there's anything.
This is
That you
just to
wanted
the
to
end of
highlight?
the month, this ending.
Yep.
And literally, we put this together, yes, we just are closing the books. We've,
What page you on?
this
This
is.
is the
this a
second
different
agenda item.
report, not in the budget book.
the second document on
This
the
is second
agenda.
document that's on there,
Monthly budget
Monthly
update.
budget update.
budget status report. We get
Yeah.
one every month. And new this year is us trying to project fund balance at the end of the
Right.
year. And we're at the end of May, so we still have, actually it says 10+2 forecast, it's 11+1. Because we only have June left, so we have
Right.
one more month.
Right.
But our forecast shows us using $499,000 of fund balance this year. That is assuming that all groups get 8%.
Mhm.
And we do not give $2,000 for every person other than CSCA. And confidential
Same as the assumptions.
assumptions that we had this exactly. And so this was done a week after this one, so we've assumed slightly better. I think we're over here like a $600,000 deficit this year, so
But we haven't
we're gonna get a
settled on
little
that
bit
yet.
better.
But we aren't settled yet.
It's still a work in progress, and there's still big questions, right?
Yeah,
Where we
yeah.
land.
Okay. That sounds like a Thursday meeting.
We won't have decided by Thursday, what our labor groups are getting.
Yeah.
We will have most of the action items on the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, that will get us.
That's not everything.
Okay, well, that's
Yeah.
that's at least, better than we thought.
I understand what you're saying, though, in terms of more discussion on the plan.
Yes.
I understand. There's a lot to do.
All right.
Well,
sounds-
okay.
But again, in a realistic time frame, that's, but my point was that we generated so much good, I think, information and ideas that I really see that we could, and also questions, so I can see that we can do more than a regular meeting like this, but in time, because we got a lot. You're still new and we're still dealing with all this, we may revise and this is a lot that's just not settled yet.
How long can I keep that you're still new?
I was including that. I looked at it like kind of I didn't understand that part. You're not new at being a CIO.
Yeah.
I'm talking about here. Everybody's new at a new place, no matter how experienced you are.
Yeah, I think if there's fiscal policy issues that we're touching on here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that to me would be an important aspect.
Yes.
Of this conversation, yes.
And it's also
I
about
totally like
what
that.
we don't fund as much as
Yes.
what we
Yeah.
do fund.
Yes.
Because we tend to
We should
roll
jot
over
some of
our
these
budget
down.
in a pretty
Yeah.
predictable fashion,
Yeah.
omitting the things that we have been omitting.
Yeah,
Is the-
yeah. Should write some of
Is the
this
meeting
down.
over?
I think the budget sustainability work group will touch.
It will.
It will.
It will.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
that works.
All right, well, I'm not on that. That's
All right.
I'm
Well, Thank you
wanted
very
to
much.
just-
I hope that
Thank
was
you,
helpful.
Brian.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
very helpful.
Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
you.
Really useful.